Okay, I was born in Newton, Massachusetts, actually, outside of Boston. And what else do I need to say? And then I came to Canada in 1973 and been here ever since, so it's now 50 years.
Okay.
So I did get into social work then, but I don't know how much detail you want on that.
Is there anything relevant perhaps to your family that might have led you in the direction of social work? And if not, you can just start wherever you would like to in terms of your beginning origins as a social worker.
Well, I think the idea got into my head by a high school counselor. At that time, of course, women could be teachers, nurses, social workers, and housewives. That was it. And social worker kind of stuck. But a very long story short, I ended up spending some time in Europe. To my surprise, learned languages, became fluent in German, and met a very charming Spaniard who I later married. Again, I won't go into a lot of detail, but so I came back and I finished, I had an undergrad 3 years, and so my year abroad ended up changing my life. Came back and finished majoring in German. My first job was with WGBH in Boston. This is the PBS then, which was, and I worked there for a year and then ended up decided I wanted to go into social work. So went into child welfare, having majored in German. Didn't have a clue what I was doing. Absolutely, totally a clue. Spent a year with child protection. And suddenly there was a world that I had never seen. And I decided, okay, the problem is me. I need to just get some training and then I can fix these problems, right? Went to Boston University, who at the time were doing casework group work and community organization as separate streams. And it struck me that these things are connected, that doing clinical work and community work, for example, needed to be connected. So I was one of those mature students. There were about half a dozen of us who kind of got together and bonded and did some thinking about this. When I graduated, this was in the 60s now, so I really wanted to get involved in civil rights. So I went to work in what we love to call the inner city of Boston. I don't know whether you know Boston at all. But
I know about Southie in Boston, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about
different.
Button.
I went to work in the South End,
okay.
Which at the time was a black Puerto Rican ghetto. And the American government had funded the Action for Boston Community Development. So the feds were going over the states and funding city stuff like that. And so there was a community organization in the South End with a number of satellite offices, one of which was the Family Service Clinic. So that's where I went to work. And I worked there for 8 years. At that time I was married. My husband at the time was doing his doctorate. Again, a lot of stories, because he was in the world in Cambridge and Harvard, and I was in the world of the ghetto of Boston. And so the contrast was, again, many stories. Let's see. So I was one of 5 whites in otherwise about 100. It was a huge. The clinic only had a small group of people, but in the organization as a whole, there were over 100 people. And we worked the streets. And having learned the Freudian model at Boston University, it didn't work in the ghetto. Guess what? It didn't take me long to figure out that study, diagnosis, and treatment individually was not the problem. We didn't learn about racism. We didn't learn about redlining. We didn't learn about class issues. We didn't learn any of that stuff at Boston University. So I got a very fast education and a whole new world. When Martin Luther King was, so here's one story, when he was killed in '68, of course Boston, the cities in the US were exploding. So we were all called into a meeting of everybody, and we were going on 24-hour shifts. I drew the night shift. We just drew straws. I drew the night shift, but they were keeping whites in the back room because we were not popular at that point. So we were running the Gestetner. Do you remember what a Gestetner is? We were running that in the back room, and there were a bunch of teenagers in the basement. They'd gotten them all together to try to keep the whole thing under control. This was the leadership, the black leadership of the community. And then they'd let them out little by little later at night, and fanned out over that, over the neighborhood. And Boston did not blow, and that's because of the black leadership in that community. They really got together. So we had brought a sleeping bag, and we bedded down at about 4:30 in the morning, and I went home the next day. But that was an interesting moment for sure. Anyway, so my husband at the time then finished his work, and he got a job at Dow in the Spanish department, and so we moved there, thinking we'll be there for a few years and then we'll come back. And he was on a green card at the time, and they were conscripting for Vietnam, so he was among many who stayed in academia until he was too old to be conscripted. And we moved to Nova Scotia, and anyway, we ended up staying, and so I was looking for work. So I had, in the back of my head, thought at some point academia might be interesting. And having done street work, and realized the disconnect between what I had learned in academia and what the reality out there. So I walked into the Maritime School of Social Work and said, well, does anybody need anything? And one of the profs walked by at the time and said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, we're thinking about a community-based placement in Sackville. You want to take that on? And I thought, oh, sure, why not? And took 4 students out to what then was a new planned community. So you know about Sackville.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, at that time, so this was 73, so early 74, it was a planned community, but just starting. And in the meantime, we had adopted a child who was 10 days old. Took him with me. He was very portable at the time, of course. In Sackville at the time, the only institutions, there were schools, was Catholic Church. Great bunch of priests and nuns. And they had a little house, and that's where we set up. So, here we are. What should we do? Well, the book says, let's look at the plan. So there's a big binder with the plan for Sackville, and we looked through trying to find community development. 1 paragraph. The rest was streets and sewers and schools, but no services whatsoever. A few gas stations. Okay, so that doesn't work. So the book says we're supposed to talk to community leaders. Well, at the time, it was a county seat, with the county seat actually in Ecum-Secum. A fishing village way out of the East Coast. So that wasn't going to work. So what do? Well, how about talking to the people who live here? What an idea! So we made up a little 1-page survey and went banging on doors. And we got an explosion as peoples were very, very unhappy, and it tended a lot to be military families. The husband took the car into town to the base, and the woman was left with a couple of kids and nothing, no place to go, nothing to do, no way to get anywhere. So people were very unhappy. So by the end of 4 months, and we realized, of course, there was no representation, so we invented the Greater Sackville Community Council. How did you do that? Amazing! Well, what did you do? We talked to people. So the next group of students we took out, nobody had ever heard of the Greater Sackville Community Council, of course, and we needed somehow to stretch out to spread the word. Well, the city of Halifax at the time, in its wisdom, had decided it needed a new dump, and they had located it in the middle of Sackville. And they held a public meeting, and a lot of people showed up. So we pulled a Saul Alinsky, set up a table outside, saying, Greater Sackville Community, sign up here. We signed up 400 people in an hour.
Holy, wow.
So it became a thing. And over the years, people said, we need services. We need medical services. We want a hospital. Well, the medical people said, no, you don't want a hospital in Sackville when you've got a major medical center in Halifax. What you need is a clinic that deals with scratches and sore throats and earaches and broken bones and, the stuff that you don't need a major hospital for. And so we ended up with the Cobequid Multi-Service Center, which exists to this day. So that was how I got into it. So after a few years of doing that, they said to me, they being the school, maritime school, now you're going into the classroom. I'd never taught in my life. I had no idea what I was doing. Shoved me through the door in the classroom, slammed the door and said, good luck. So it's sort of trial by fire. And over the years, I learned a lot. And at the time, we were switching from a 2-year master's to a BSW master's sequence and targeting people in the field, working in the field, which meant that we didn't start classes until 5 o'clock in the afternoon and went to 10 o'clock at night. And I taught the 7:30 to 10 class. Well, you can imagine, these are people who've been working all day, gone to a 5 o'clock class. So I'd start to talk. And they were dead, absolutely dead. So I tried coffee and sugar, and that worked to some extent. But I learned you had to get people up and moving around, so you talk. Very interactive teaching is necessity is the mother of, right? I learned how to do that. We were also we had some faculty discussions around active teaching and that kind of thing. So I was learning that too. But I was, so then, let's see, so it was around, so that was 1974. And into early 80s, and then Fred Ween, who was a director at the time, walked into my office and said, had you ever thought of doing a doctorate? At which point I burst into tears. I don't know whether you know Fred, but
yeah, I know Fred.
he didn't know what the heck he walked into, as I was going through a divorce at the time, and I was not in great shape. And so Dal gave me a scholarship, and I took the SATs, which were a disaster. I failed them all. The SATs are timed, and they give you, here's a scene, and here's 3. What are you going to do? Which one do you pick, A, B, and C? And I'd sit there and say, well, it depends on the context. In this context, it should be A, but in that context, and then ding, time was up, and I totally was a disaster. Long story short, Cornell at the time was recruiting mid-career professionals. They had reorganized the home ec program or college into something called human ecology. Put a bunch of departments in there, and then everything was left over. Went into something called human service studies. Those were the people looking for people like me. But I had applied to a different department and had gotten a cold call from a student there saying, come stay with me. As somebody said, go talk to people there, actually, just, be a real human being instead of a piece of paper with SATs failed. So I went, and this woman someone had put my name in the grad school lounge, I think, and this woman called me, Marley Campbell, and said, come stay with me. So I did, and she introduced me to a bunch of her fellow students, and I went to the grad rep. So I forget what the name of the department was, or the program, but it was combining sociology and psych, and I thought that would be a good thing. But they wanted me to take a whole bunch of courses. I thought, I was 42 at that time. I thought, I'm not going to spend a year doing stuff I'm really not interested in. And I had gone into the office of the grad rep, and he had my GRE slip on his desk, and I thought, oh, there goes that. And he looked at it and put it aside and said, now tell me what else you've done in your life. Mm-hmm. Immediately fell in love with him. Anyway, after talking with him and saying, I really, doing all these courses that I really don't have any interest in, he said, go to human service studies. They're looking for people like you. So I did. And they didn't say, this is what you have to take and that was what you have to do. They said, why are you here and what do you want to do? Well, I didn't really know. I wanted to get out of Halifax, and I also, this was an opportunity, but I hadn't really formed an idea of what I wanted to do. There were 3 units. One was social policy, one was teaching in higher ed, and the third was program evaluation. Oh. And by far the strongest of those 3 units was program evaluation. So I ended up there, and it was a good decision. Another good decision I made was a new faculty member named Jennifer Green. I don't know whether you know that name.
I do.
Yeah. She was new at the time, and I chose her as my chair. I was her first student.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was one of the better decisions I made. But I became very immersed in all of that at the time. And so this was early 80s, 83. A new book in evaluation had written called Stakeholder Model. Okay. And essentially, well, let me back up. People were wondering why nobody was using their perfectly crafted evaluations. Volumes full, which they submitted to decision makers, and nobody was using them, and they were really wondering why not. Anthony Brick wrote the book called Stakeholder Models, in which he essentially said, well, if you involve the people who are going to be using it, they might actually find it more useful. Oh, everybody was all excited about this idea of participation. Well, I came from social work, and it's like, what's new about that? It certainly made sense to me, but everybody else thought this was new. Mm-hmm. So we had the usual courses on statistics and research and stuff, and had the old regular models. But I came in with a cohort of about 14 of us who really boned it, and these were people, mid-career professionals, and so we did a lot of advocacy around the sort of very traditional way of thinking about all of that. In the summer of 83, I had 2 kids with me at that point, my daughter and son. They came back to Nova Scotia to be with their father for the summer, and I ended up going to a workshop at Highlander Research and Education Center.
Amazing.
Do you know about that?
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, lucky. Well, it changed my life because John Gaventa was research director at the time. And so I was telling him about this. People were all excited about this idea of participation. And he said, well, come on down to the library. I'm going to show you a few books. And he loaded my arms with books on participatory research and evaluation. Oh, Cornell has 23 libraries. No problem. I'll find it at Cornell. Zilch. There was nothing there. So it was brand new at the time, but it made perfectly good sense to me. And so I did my thesis on that, and was the first that was the first thesis on participatory research or evaluation at the time. Since then, of course, it's become very mainstream, but at the time it was really, what in the world? It messes up the rigor. That was the...
Yeah. The inconvenient participant.
That's right.
I have to stop you for 1 second because I see him having a problem, so I'm going to switch my back up here.
Would you like some water or some tea or coffee?
I'm good for the...
So anyway, I came after I got my doctorate at Cornell. Cornell, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right. But we were definitely on the fringes at Cornell. And HSS, Human Service Studies, has since been dissolved completely, which is too bad. But
So can I just ask you, like, Cornell, Ithaca has a bit of a reputation of being a little bit of like a weird place, and that there's some weird stuff there, like the eco village, and it's very communitarian, and the village of Ithaca has lots of unusual stuff, sewing co-ops, and the Moosewood restaurant.
Right.
What's they say about Moosewood? 7 hippies on a handshake, and it's still in existence.
Still exists, and every time I go back, I go.
Exactly. So, do you think the presence of that particular field of study, like, is there some symbiotic relationship between what Ithaca represents and what happens at Ithaca and that program?
The evaluation program?
The human service.
Human service studies. I don't, probably, but they just didn't know what to do with these 3 departments, and so they kind of shoved them together, but it was very definitely at the bottom of the prestige ladder. But as I say, I came in with a cohort of people like me, and still in touch with many of them. We learned a lot from each other, and one thing I remember is one of the first courses we took, the prof, who was an older woman, said, "It doesn't exist if you can't measure it." And during the break, we all said, "We got to take over this course," which we did. And they were looking for new profs at the time, and we became very active in those committees. And Jennifer was one of the results of that. She was just great, but she, at the time, she was and still is, or she's retired now, was a wonderful balance of quantitative and qualitative. And you probably know in the field, the quants and the quals have been been at war for years. But we took on the traditionalists and had a lot of fun doing it. So anyway, I came back to Dow because they held my position as a part-timer, because I had gotten a job as part-time. And it was stepping back, in the 70s, the faculty had gone on strike because I've forgotten what it was at the time. There was no faculty union, that was it. And so they instituted part-timers as part of the union. Then when I came back in the 80s, I was still part-time. And the faculty went on strike again in the late 80s around the regression line, where the women were all on the bottom and the men were all on the top. We had a lot of public support for that. And so I was teaching part-time, and I was doing evaluations in the community part-time, and thought I was pretty smart. And was walking the picket line with a guy from the business school one day and telling him how smart I was to do that. And he said, "My dear, we do that on a full-time salary." Oh, that's how it works. So when it came to the point that it was time for me to do full-time, I might as well be do full-time, since I was being paid part-time for what amounted to full-time work. I was told by colleagues, the only way you're going to get it is to go someplace else, get an offer, and come back and bargain. Yeah? Again, there had been a position that came up, but I didn't get it. Anyway, so Carleton was, again, switching from MSW to BSW, Master Sequence, and was recruiting. So I came up and interviewed. At that time, Carleton was a very well-known and respected feminist faculty, and I just fit like a glove. So, and so I went back to Dal and said, bye-bye. And so came here, and there were 4 new recruits that year. I was one of them. Rashmi Luther, who I'm going to send you to, was another. And she's here. Yeah, and so.
And what year was that?
This was, what year was that? 91.
Okay.
91. So I've been here almost, 30 plus years. Yeah, so I was teaching full time, doing field work, because at the time you actually got credit for being field supervisor. Yeah, so I taught a bunch of courses, which many faculty did. You kind of did a little bit of everything. But I ended up teaching the research course and doing, well, you're going to teach research, and guess what? Social workers hate research because mostly they're there to help people. And they'd taken an undergrad statistics course. And as far as they were concerned, research had nothing to do with helping people. So here I am teaching a bunch of students who were sitting there going, I hate research. And one of them actually said that in the first course. And I thought, and the other thing I realized is, of course, organizations and groups in the community are desperate for research and evaluation. They don't have the staff or the money to do it. So send out a note to everybody saying, you want some free research? Yeah. So we were swamped with requests. So what I did was students did an actual, the other thing I wanted to say was students do best when you have hands-on. When you, instead of theory to practice, practice to theory. And so we had a lot of adventures because it's unpredictable. So the first was one of the first years, halfway through, so the course, so the students got to pick out which, back up. We then went to the agencies and said, here's what we can offer, and here's what you need, and we put those two things together. The students then chose which project they wanted to work on. So it was the first or second year when in one agency, shall be unnamed, the ED got fired by the board halfway through. Oh, we're going to fail the course. Students panicked, and it wasn't in their control or our control as to what was going on internally at any given agency. So I thought, okay, well, we have to go back to the classroom where it's all predictable and we can plan and put out our semester readings and all of that. And then I thought, wait a minute, where in life do you start in September and go through April in some straight line with nothing unforeseen happening? Well, not in any life I know. So I thought, okay, what we need to do is be flexible. We know probably one of them is going to crash. We don't know why. But students do not fail because the ED and the board get into a squabble. and we'll work it out. And we did. I mean, over the years, all kinds of things happened. Many stories on that one. And actually after that, Karen Schwartz and Angie Vanderzand took over the course. They wrote the book, whose name escapes me, something like
I want to say
anyway,
research radicals, but I'm not sure that that's what it is.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
you probably know the
I
book,
know the book,
and that since has continued, and they've refined it much better than I have. I don't know what's happening now, because the faculty at Carleton has turned over completely. I think Teresa's one of the few left.
She just retired.
Of my generation.
Yeah, she just finished. She just retired.
Yeah, she's just retiring. I'm hearing that,
yeah.
and Sarah Todd is the director. And
yes.
So she's the other one I know, and Sarah's wonderful. I do see her from time to time.
Yes.
So
Can
where
I just
was I?
Ask one question for clarification. So was it one student to one project in the evaluation course, or
No.
was it a collaborative?
Students worked in small groups.
Okay.
And that always presents an issue of how you're going to work together. How do we grade?
Mm-hmm.
Things like this. The issue of grading is an individual competitive process, and it doesn't work when you're trying to work collaboratively and work teamwork. And I don't know any place in the real world where you don't work in teams. So those skills are really important, but the university still, you grade on a curve. And it doesn't work in that kind of thing. So the whole grade inflation and how you grade, and you had to teach students, okay, you're going to work in a group, how are you going to work together? Some people will work more, some less. How are you going to work with that? What are you going to do if you think a member is not carrying their weight? Complain to me that so-and-so isn't carrying their load. How are you going to deal with it? These are skills
Mm-hmm.
that people need to learn of, what's going on in your life. I'm feeling as if I'm doing more work than you. How do you, what's happening in your life?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, helping people to learn those kinds of skills. So then I retired in 2005 because at the time, you had to at 65.
Oh.
I changed the next year, but it was fine. But I could teach one course, which I did for the next 10 years. But it wasn't at the school, it was at the Faculty of Public Affairs at the time, which had a fourth-year capstone. And I had students doing the same kind of thing in the community. And then it was about 10 years later, I thought, you know what, I really don't want to do this anymore. And it's not good for me and not good for the students. It's time to move on. So I did. And so that was the end of my social work career, but of course not my activist. So I have the gift of time to do other things, and have been very active ever since, with a whole lot of other things and a bunch of books.
Mm-hmm. So will you tell us some about, because I see activism as part of social work, what sort of things have you done since retirement?
Oh my. Well, I got into program evaluation and was very active then for years, and have not, well, as I say, I just did a recent chapter, but haven't been active in the last, publishing-wise, and evaluation. Have not done professional evaluations for years, but I did for many years with a whole bunch of different organizations. Loved it. Got to know lots of people. Just to give you one example, the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. I did a couple of evaluations for them, and have, of course, come to know many of them. They're wonderful, wonderful people and a wonderful group. And they had, I can't remember exactly when, but McGuinty was in power, and they were getting a lot of pressure to allow the Muslim community, meaning Imland's conservative wing to mediate marriage issues. And CCMW knew that what would happen was the women would be pushed back into bad marriages. So they lobbied very hard. Long story short, McGinty backed down. Thanks to that kind of organizing, and I did the evaluation. That was just one example. Got to know them, and that was one of their successes, as Sharia law would have come in to around the Muslim women's community. So that's just one example I did, and then things like this book, Activism That Works. We got, I think it was a SHIRT grant. I've forgotten where we got the money. My colleague Maureen Wilson, who lives in Montreal, you may want to interview her.
That'd be great.
We worked together for a long time. She was, again, backing up, she was in Nicaragua back in the late 80s. And she sent out a note saying, I need a colleague who speaks Spanish and who does participatory work.
Wow.
And I thought, I think I fit that. Wrote to her, and we worked together in Nicaragua at the time, and particularly in 1990 when Ortega was then a left wing, and he got voted out, and that was quite a moment in history. You know, the Contras had, with the U.S. support, had been raising havoc for years. Anyway, Maureen and I became colleagues and worked together ever since, and we've become fast friends, and she now is in Montreal. So we wrote a number of books together, which are sitting there. Most of them are chapters in books, but became very involved in, participatory research over the years. Worked with community, the Activism That Works, for example. We interviewed across the country groups of activist organizations, and knowing that they rarely have time to reflect. So we approached them and said, we will run some workshops and things to just let you step back and ask, how do you know you're successful? And people don't get time to reflect. So they really resonated to that. Each one was very different about what they could do, wanted to do, ended up doing. So we had to be very flexible. But I think it worked, and we found people doing different things that constituted what they called success. So that's Activism That Works, and that was our last book.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the other books that you have here? You've got this great pile.
I do.
And there's probably a few gems in those stories as well.
Yeah. So the first one was this one, Seeds of Fire.
I remember that one only.
Yeah, social development. So we got into a lot of international stuff, and I haven't said anything about the kind of international work I did. I was on the board of the International Association of Schools of Social Work for several years, number of years, and that morphed into something else. It's not called that anymore. It's called something else.
International Association of Schools of Social Work, and then International Association of Social Work Education. Yeah, it's like
Possibly.
Together. Yeah. But it's part of the IFSW. We're
Yeah.
connected.
Anyway, I had become fluent in Spanish, having married to a Spaniard for 20 years. That's a good way to learn language. You go and nobody understands what you're saying. Everybody's talking to you because you're not saying anything. So I was on that board for a number of years, and then on the CASSW board, which has also morphed into something else. So became very connected with a lot of international work, and so did evaluations in a whole range of places, plus attended a number of conferences over the years. In 1990, we were in Peru when the Sendero Luminoso was blowing up. Electric stuff. And an advisory, tourist advisory went out saying, don't go to Peru. We went anyway. And it was quite the adventure. But it was one of those instances where we had a lot of, so we got to know international people and hear a lot of what was going internationally. And that was one place where, because I was trilingual at that point, I was sitting quietly in the audience, and there was a presentation in Spanish. The English presentations were simultaneously translated. The Spanish ones weren't. So at one point I'm sitting there quietly, not saying anything, and the people who didn't understand stood up and said, "We have to have translation." You! Ah! So I got into doing a lot of that, because I was the only one at the time. But that, those kinds of adventures and learning and connections meant that in many, many cases and situations, I got to know people working internationally. Mm-hmm. So that, and anyway, we Seeds of Fire, Highlander, if you know their book, what's the name of it? It has Seeds of Fire in it, but
yes.
Anyway, we asked them if we could use that, and they said yes, which we did. So it's a whole bunch of chapters on, accompanying the process and popular movements and social work and all of that. So, and André Jacob, who is, he may be a social worker actually. Do you know his name?
No.
Oh, he's a great guy. Anyway, he did the cover. But he is also became very much a part of our group, and we're still in touch. He's in Montreal.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's a poet and artist, and I think he has a background in social work, but I may be wrong about that.
Okay.
And then a lot of it was this one was a chapter in this book called Globalization, Global Justice and Social Work. Okay. And there were a couple of Brits, Ian Ferguson and Michael Lavalette. Yes. Do you know him?
Yeah, they're like two very radical. One of the
absolutely.
I shouldn't say the few, but they don't hide their politics at all.
No, they don't. Anyway, they were attending one of the Canadian Schools of Social Work conferences in Toronto. And Maureen and I did a paper and talked about the neoliberal project and how what this was doing. This was back in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And they approached us and said, wow, we haven't heard this before from North Americans anyway. Would you like to collaborate with us? And have been in touch with them ever since. Wow. But anyway, we wrote a chapter in this book. This is a while ago, so I don't remember all of it. Oh, anyway, I became a co-author. Oh, I know what. Because I had all the international connections, what they had said was, we have a bunch of chapters from England and Australia and US and now Canada. We're covering the world. And I said, wait a minute.
Sorry.
I think you're missing a few people. Because I had the connections.
Yes.
I connected them with a whole bunch of people in Latin America and Europe and Africa. And so they said, well, why don't you be a co-author? So I was. So that's that book. And again, Michael Lavalette did the keynote. Were you there? It was in New Brunswick. What a barn burner that was. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, he's amazing. Mm-hmm. Great guy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, this is one that Rashmi and I and another faculty member at Carleton, Bernice Moreau, who's she moved back to Toronto after she retired, and we've lost touch with her. But It's called Seen But Not Heard, Aboriginal Women and Women of Color in the Academy. This was done, what year was this? CREA published it. Do you know what CREA is?
No.
Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women.
Okay.
So that was, I'm trying to find the date. It doesn't say here. That's interesting. I can't remember when. It was a long time ago. Anyway, so we did a bunch of work around the experience of Aboriginal and women of color in the academy. Wanda was one of them, in which, and Wanda will tell you this story better than I do, but when she was recruited at Dow, oh, we've got diversity, so she's on every committee going, because they wanted diversity, right? She was it. And then she's supposed to do her thesis and do her teaching. And of course, then when it came up to being promoted and brought on as tenure, she hadn't done any research. Well, she's representing the Black community and every other diversity at the time. So the whole point of if you're Black or Aboriginal, you're supposed to represent everybody and your community on every committee, and you don't have time to do your work. Shireen Razak has one chapter in this. Yeah, I haven't looked at this for quite a while, but this was, we did, let me see if I can find who did chapters and what.
I guess Shireen just retired, although I'm not sure
Did she?
if that's true, but I heard something about that.
And her sister, Narda,
Yes.
is one that I've known for years.
Yes,
And
and I think Narda retired as well. So.
yeah, have you talked to her?
No, not yet, no.
Yeah. So Wanda wrote a chapter, Joy in St. Louis. She was at U of O, University of Ottawa, law school, very outspoken. So we wrote several chapters. Patricia Montour Angus, she's an Aboriginal woman. Anyway, that was one, and that was early on. Activism worked hard. So here's another one by Ian and Michael Lavalette, and I wrote a chapter in that. Maybe Maureen did, the two of us. I don't see where we are, but I think we wrote a chapter in this. This is the most recent. This is Canadian Journal of Program Evaluation, did a lot of that. So I worked with the team of people around program evaluation and engagement and participatory evaluation. Brad Cousins, I don't know whether you know these names. Lynn Shula. Anyway, over the years we worked together to do quite a bit with the American Evaluation Association and the Canadian Association of Evaluators. So attended a lot of those conferences. In fact, Jennifer got us involved as grad students. So became very involved in that. And there was one year, it was in the early 90s, when there was a panel discussion of all the past presidents, all men. Oh. And there were a bunch of women sitting together saying, what's wrong with this picture? And it was great. We went up to somebody's hotel room and said, we got to do something about this. And the Feminist Caucus was invented. We became very active over the years with the American Evaluation Association. That was the AEA. And I think made some progress over the years. We were shit disturbers. So anyway, we did a bunch of stuff. This is Ted Jackson. Do you know his name? Very big in the evaluation field, research field, and this is a book called Knowledge Shared, Participatory Evaluation in Community Development Cooperation. And one of my first evaluation gigs after I got back from grad school was in Texas. And they wanted somebody who spoke Spanish and somebody who did participatory research. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. And it was funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture or something like that. And the problem was that farmers on the border in Texas, a lot of drugs were coming over, and somebody would hand them a paper bag full of cash, and the farmers took it and let them go. But that was their only source of income. These are poor farmers, and so the agriculture wanted to develop a way for people to make their living without accepting drug money. So they had developed co-ops around goats, goat meat, goat cheese, goat milk, that kind of thing, because these are village people. So they wanted an evaluation. So here I go. And the lead person in that was a goat fancier. I learned there's different kinds of goat people. One, he had prize goats. He introduced me to his prize goat. The others kind of let their goats. So those prizes were bred very carefully, but there was the other group just let their goats out into the field to do what they would do. In any case, when I went to his place, then we drove down to, I've forgotten the name of the town now, Redford, Texas, something like that. And I was taken aside by the wife of the project manager and said, "You can't talk to the men." Oh, how am I going to do this? And there happened to be another consultant in town of the male persuasion. I grabbed onto him and said, "I need you right now. We're going to talk to people together." So we did. And the problem was that the Anglos were saying, well, these Spanish people, they never come. They don't do anything. They won't come to our meetings. And the Spanish people said, well, they talk all in English and we don't understand what they're saying.
So I was
like, duh. So anyway, I developed a participatory process, designed it all out, and then left. And of course, then went back to see what had happened. And of course, not a lot had happened. So we developed, with this other consultant who was a great guy, we developed a process of a participatory process of finding out what people were doing and how they were doing. And it was bilingual, and the younger people were bilingual. So we had them do the translating, the teenagers and stuff, and so they actually had something to do.
And a stake in it.
Yeah. And out of that came a report, which nothing happened. In fact, because the Anglos and the Hispanics were struggling to understand each other and had very different ways of raising goats. And there was a local priest whose goats went out into the field, and he and the Anglo guy hated each other, and we tried at one point to mediate between them. It was a total failure. They just yelled at each other. In any case, we wrote a report, and I was accused of being divisive. And so it was all my fault. And in fact, the organization dissolved, and it was my fault because it was divisive. We had brought people together, or tried. So that was my first adventure. And so over the years did a number of evaluations for a bunch of people everywhere. This is called Academic Callings by Janice Newsom. Don't know whether that names anything. I wrote a chapter there called, and I've forgotten, this was quite a few years ago. I should have looked at all these things and remembered what I wrote. Okay. An Ode to Wisdom, Got, Don't Got, Borrowed, and Sought.
And, that's very interesting.
There's a chapter in that book, and 87. Sorry for not remembering any of this. Gender counts in academia, whatever the rhetoric. Someday, maybe I'll get into teaching, no straight and narrow path, which is, as we know, is what's happening to women. Part-time, full-time work, talked about that. And then with this group that I'd worked with under Brad Cousins on evaluation, collaborative approaches to evaluation. We worked as a team. for a number of years. Brad lives here in Ottawa, and we've become fast friends. And so we developed a process of collaborative approaches to research, and that continues on. I have dropped out of that, except back in the late 90s. It was Jennifer that approached me and said, would you write a, what's the name of the volume? There's a set of volumes in evaluation. And would I write a volume on participatory research? This was late 90s, and I did. And the first chapter was co-written by Brad and myself. I approached him, and that has become one of the most widely read chapters around engaging people in evaluation. And so it has become very much a must-be-read book, particularly the first chapter. And I didn't bring it down with me. It's upstairs. And 25 years later, we were asked to do a retrospect.
Wow.
So that's what we just did. And it was interesting because I'm just not keen anymore on doing a lot of academic work. I'm much more involved in activism right now. And controlling the pace, because I'm getting older and I can't do all that stuff, all the rushing around that I used to do. And Brad wanted to do counting. How many times had we been cited? So a whole look at that. And I had written I was going to write the last part, which was in 98, was a bunch of issues, and like ethics and engaging people and so forth. And so I wrote the last part, just updating that.
Wow.
And the reviewers came back and said, well, the counting doesn't tell us much, but we really like the issues piece.
Funny?
So I rewrote that, and we've submitted it and has been accepted, and that's coming out, I guess, this spring.
And what journal is that in?
It's a book called
okay,
Issues in Research or something.
Okay.
Around evaluation. Sorry, I
No,
have to
I'll
look up I can look up
Yeah.
all those names. So I haven't done much homework that I should have done.
Oh, that's all good.
But
So
yeah.
So you have had like an amazing career with lots of different
Yeah.
trips, or
Well, you start out here and then you go here and then you
Yeah.
go there and something happens and you go someplace else, and I don't know where very few lives you start out here and you go in a straight line wherever.
So if you were going to give some advice to someone who is beginning their career, the purpose of the project's leadership, and leadership means a lot of different things, but innovation is part of it, and working with populations or communities that are marginalized or who don't get a lot of attention, that's part of leadership. If you were going to give advice to somebody who was seeking your advice about how to be an effective leader, how to be successful as a leader, how to become a leader, what advice would you give them?
Well, back in that initial social work training, one thing I did learn was how to listen. Really listen. We did process recording at that point, way back. And so you really had to listen and listen for feelings as well. So that stuck with me. So I think listening is so important, and we don't do enough of that. We being the human race, but certainly social workers. I don't know now, but for me, that was a big lesson in my original training. I guess I've always felt that being active in the community is what makes community, and I think that comes from my mother, who of course was a stay-at-home homemaker back then. I think she was, in retrospect, quite bored, so she was very active in the community. She was on the school board, she was commissioner of the Girl Scouts, she she did a lot of things in the community, volunteer, of course, because my father could earn enough to support the family in those days. So I think I got a lot of that from her, in the sense of what community means, because they were very much a part of the community where I grew up. So I think that was a big influence. Plus, I had the privilege of a good education, and one of the things that got pounded into us is, if you want a democracy, you got to be active, you got to be engaged. So that, I think, provided the groundwork for a lot of what I do now. And so I'm involved in a lot of community activities here. Try to keep it under control, because I get a little carried away, way too much. So I have to say no to a lot of things, and there's so many important things to get involved in that, I have to work to say, I can't do that. But, so if you want to know what I'm doing now, very involved in the Hassan Diab case. Do you know about that?
Tell us a little bit about that.
Briefly, this is a Muslim man who has been accused by the French of having been involved in a bombing of a synagogue in Paris in 1980. Very long story, which I won't spend a lot of time going into, because you can see it online. Long story short, he's innocent. Been proven to be innocent. He didn't do it. But it's very political, both in France and here. They want somebody. And so he has been, he ended up being extradited to France for 3 years, spent 3 years in prison there, was exonerated by 2 judges, and they have special court called the Terrorism Court, and these 2 judges basically did a thorough examination and let him go, because he wasn't there. He was in Beirut studying for his exams at the time. Plus there was fingerprint evidence which had been withheld of a suspect, which didn't match Hassan's. In any case, I've always wondered what I would have done in the 30s and 40s had I been in Germany at the time. And here was an example of a Muslim man being totally persecuted for something he didn't do, and it was clearly Islamophobic. He was a terrorist. And so I am on the support committee. It goes on. He was tried in absentia. Again, he was let go. Then the prosecution in France appealed. Last spring there was a trial. He was found guilty. No evidence of this, however. We knew he would be declared guilty. We don't call it convicted, because he wasn't convicted. He was declared guilty. And he is now an international terrorist on the no-fly list. He lives here in Ottawa with his family. No, I became involved in that to say, wait a minute, this time it's the Muslims. Back then it was the Jews. Okay, so I'm on the support committee, very active. We meet weekly. I've, of course, gotten to know Hassan and his family very well, and so I'm very involved in that. It goes on and on. We're trying to get the Trudeau government at this point to say, we will not extradite him again, over and out, period, and that will end it. But right now, we don't know. And the only, it's secret. If France has asked for him to be extradited, it's secret. So we'll only know when the RCMP shows up on his door to arrest him.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm heavily involved in that. Another case, Mohammed Harkat, don't know whether you've heard of him. He was one of, after 2011, the anti-terrorism thing was, and he was one of those arrested and sent to Guantanamo North. Do you know about that? Yeah, no. We made a special jail for these guys who were swept up post around 2002.
Mm-hmm.
All of them have been exonerated except Mo. And so he's here with his wife. Again, known him all these years. And the border control continues to sit outside his home. 2 guys in a truck, in a car.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. And right now he has post-polio, so he's in serious medical concerns. And so he still has to take his computer into CBS-8, and then they swipe it and look for, it's ridiculous. Anyway, so there's a group of us who are supporting him. Yeah, it's the persecution of Muslim men continues, but certainly he's one of them. Good friend of mine started something called the Gotta Go campaign for public toilets in the city, and I was involved because she's a very close friend of mine, so I got involved. And she's dropped out and I've picked it up, so I'm very involved in that. It's a local, non-partisan, 100% of the population. We're not, well, we have no money, but it's a bunch of volunteers, and we've actually got a lot of students.
Oh, that's
So
great.
I continue to supervise. Some of them are social work students. Over the years, especially during COVID, when the social work students couldn't do clinical work,
Yeah,
and they
that's
need to do
amazing.
something.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
So they got involved with us, and some of them were wonderful, and some not so wonderful, obviously. But so I'm continuing, and the University of Ottawa students as well. So we've got 3 students this term, one of whom is sociology from Carleton. Great, she's a great student. So still doing that, and so we go to the school of social work with their agency fairs and recruit, and that, you know, have the students do a variety of things. And not surprisingly, instead of saying our list, here's what we need, which we do have that list, we start with them. So why did you come to Gotta Go, and what are your interests, and what would you like to do, and how do we fit those 2 things together? And that usually works. I mean, obviously you get a range of students, so very involved in that. I'm a Raging Granny. Probably know about the Raging Grannies.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun. White old ladies get away with a lot. It's true. We can do stuff that, I mean, people beating up white old ladies in silly hats, really bad optics. So yeah, so I'm involved with them. Anyway, that's most of. I try to keep there's the peace movement, which I've, you know, I don't know whether you know what CANSEC is. It's the largest arms trade show in North America. It's right here, every year in Ottawa.
Wow.
Yeah, people don't know this.
No.
Yeah, so we've demonstrated outside there for years, and now it's grown bigger and bigger. So it's now out by it used to be at Lansdowne, and now it's out at the EY Center by the airport, which is huge.
Wow.
And you see the black cars going in with guys in suits and women, you know, buying and selling. So there's a big movement to let people know that Canada is becoming a major arms exporter and importer. Yeah, so trying to stay on the fringes of that somewhat, but yeah. So, and I've been down every week since November, with the exception of when I was away, to the demos, the ceasefire demos, pro-Palestinian, but I mean, they've been every week, and they're peaceful, they're well attended. It used to be that I knew most people, right? Don't know them anymore. I run into a few old timers, but there's a whole new cohort of people demonstrating for various things. And yeah, so that keeps me, but as I say, I can manage so much of a pace Then I sort of slowed down the pace a bit. Yeah, I don't know what else.
So I think we're probably getting towards the end. I just always ask people if there's any other story or any other information that you want to convey just before we wrap up.
I will probably think of it. I mean, there's many stories, right? Which I can think of. I don't know how many you want to hear, but I mean, any one of us who's lived this long, all people have lots of great stories.
Absolutely.
Because we are living history. Yeah. During the 60s, certainly, I got very involved in civil rights, and lived in suburbia, in basically a white suburb of Boston. And so when everybody was going south in the 60s, I thought, well, I was married to a Spaniard and he wasn't about to do that stuff. And besides, he was doing his doctoral work. So I thought, let's work at home in this white suburb. And got involved in, what was it called? Having a brain moment. Fair housing.
Okay.
So started a fair housing committee locally, and at the time, the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination had injunction power. So, white person, black person, white person could go into a rental, an apartment for rent or a house for sale, and each had this exactly same 2 kids, a dog, right? And so when, of course, the white person would go in and say, oh, here's the price and here's these wonderful things about this house or this apartment and we're welcoming you, and well, I don't think I'm quite ready to make it. Then we sent the black person in, price went up, no, here's all the negative things, no, it's not available, it's been taken. So the third white person coming and put down $10 as a deposit, and we got an injunction. And then we would go out to try to mediate, which was a real eye-opener around the hostility when you show up with a black person at the door saying, so yeah, we made some progress on that. The Commission Against Discrimination lost their injunction power because, of course, the real estate people and the landlords were furious, and they lost it, so we lost our power. But the friends that I made then are still friends of mine. Those that are still alive, yeah. Yeah, that was, again, a lesson in, this is what it feels like to have a door slammed in your face and called nigger lover, and not supposed to use that word, but that's what the words were. And I learned about the tricks that realtors play. Meet you on the corner. They're right there at 10 o'clock tomorrow when we'll go, and then they see a black family waiting and they never get picked up. And so anyway, learned a lot of lessons during that time, and ever since then have been active in civil rights.
This is so interesting to me because I have never heard of this approach, this like grassroots approach of sort of following your hunch about a landlord engaging in racism. And you're the second person. I interviewed a woman she was from New York State, but she did her social work degree at McGill and practiced in Quebec for a number of years and is now back in the U.S. But I interviewed her, and she was talking about that because she did her undergrad at University of Buffalo. And so she was talking about this project where folks would go and actually do this I'm going to experiment, it's the only word that I have, this grassroots level kind of, following your hunch that a landlord is engaging in racism. And I guess it was like it happened in many communities. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As I say, it was a lesson in how it works.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, that's one set of stories, and how, you learn, you learn a lot fast. And
I just have one question for clarification. What is redlining? You mentioned
redlining. You didn't know
but
what
I don't know
redlining
what
was.
redlining is.
I didn't know either until I got to working in the south end of Boston. And basically the insurance companies line the ghetto and don't insure landlords.
Oh.
Yeah, that's how you make a slum.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you say a little bit more about like why that works in that way?
Well, if you can't get insurance for your building or for your house,
You can't maintain it if something happens.
well, you don't keep up your property because you don't get paid if something goes wrong.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was that was one of the many eye openers. I mean, you'd watch right next door to our clinic was the local bookie.
Mm.
And I'd never met a local bookie before, or a bookie, but you'd watch. He would take numbers down. People would come and, place a bet, and then the police would come by at just exactly at 2:00 in the afternoon and pick up the slips and the payment, and this is how the system worked. Never learned that in my suburban middle class upbringing, but he was Colcutt's was his name, and he was illiterate. Colcutt, that's right. And we became buddies with him, of course.
Sure.
We were right next door, and he was illiterate, so we would help him write letters to his daughter in Mississippi.
Wow.
And to read letters back. And when my daughter, both children are adopted, when she was adopted, he gave me a number slip.
Oh, really? Wow.
As a gift. Didn't win.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll try to stop with stories.
So I guess just one other question. Your timing in Nova Scotia, so that was post-Africville.
Yes.
That probably
That's right.
You were around
Yes.
when there was lots of advocacy happening around
That's right.
that.
Yes. Yep. And at the time, Alexa McDonough was on faculty.
Yes.
And she had been, there was a lot of discussion about that, but it was done by that time. This was 73. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Bad, well, as we know.
Yes.
If people get in the way, especially if black folks, they get pushed out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, the Maritimes are a very special place. Nova Scotia is a special place for me, and as I say, my son lives there in Lunenburg. He's a chef.
Wow.
And owns 5 restaurants. So when you go to Lunenburg, let me know.
I will. That's wonderful. Excellent.
So I'm down there and still connect with old friends there, including Carolyn.
Very nice.
I haven't seen, as I say, I used to visit with Wanda, but she's not available.
No.
She is, and George, of course, known both of them for years. They're wonderful people. And most of the faculty that I was with then, of course, have long gone.
Mm-hmm. And just one more question. Who was the director when you were hired at Dow? Just to give us an era.
What was his name? Why am I thinking Gil? I'll have to, it'll work through its synapse. But he had been brought in to help with the transition. He's a World War II vet who had been involved in the bombing of Dresden and had been very radicalized by that and had been very active in the Vets for Peace. Name is gone, but it'll come back in 3 hours after you've left.
And we can fill in the blanks, but that's good information.
That's right,
for us to be able to follow our nose a little bit.
And it was a real struggle for him to get us to pay attention to that, because it's a big change from 2-year MSW, 1 year. And most of the faculty at that time were Nova Scotia people or Maritimers.
Yes.
So I was a come from away, and that was a whole education around where the lines are drawn. And yeah, that's changed, I think, a lot. Dan O'Brien was the director after him.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, the name is gone.
But we can look it up. But Dan O'Brien is another good, benchmark.
Yeah, and he's gone. I'm sure he's gone. Alexa's gone. All his people have gone. And many almost all of the faculty that I knew then, Dorothy Moore being one, Rick Williams is still around.
Oh, okay.
Pat Kearns is gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then his wife, Marion, is here. I see her regularly here.
Yes.
She's 95, and so her mind is sharp as can be. Her body's kind of crumbling underneath her, but yeah. Pat was the first person who came to my office after I got back from grad school and said, "Let's collaborate."
Wow.
And I thought, really? It was wow. So he and I did some work together and published together.
Right.
He was a great guy.
There's another policy person who I think taught me, who was like Karen's, post Karen's person. What was his name? He's dead too. He died of brain cancer not long after retiring. I can't think of his name.
Yeah. I mean, we are, those of us.
Oh, I know.
Getting long in the tooth.
Yeah. I mean, and I think we're pretty much done now, but I'll do the formal wrap up. But just like when you were talking about you learn by your mistakes. I remember being in this person's policy class, and I wish I could remember his name, when I was at Dal, which was, I started in September of 2000 and then was there. I ended up being there for 2 years because there was a strike and blah, 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 and I was slow and whatever. But I remember sitting in his class, and he was talking about globalization. And for me, this is like, why are we talking about globalization in a Canadian social policy course? And him talking about all of this stuff. And about 6 months after I finished that course, the penny dropped for me, but it took that long for me to catch up with what the implications of what he was talking about. And I actually went back to him at a conference when I bumped into him and said, I owe you an apology. Now I understand. I didn't understand when you were teaching it to me, but now I understand, and thank you very much, because it's totally changed how I look and where I look for the lines that you follow to figure out how we got where we're at with something that's happening at the community level. So yeah, there were some pretty amazing people really at Dal. And then they all sort of, obviously times changed, but people also scattered. There were a lot of people that moved away, like Donna Baines was there, and then she was at Math, and she was at Sydney, and then at UBC. So lots of people who, were there and then went on to other things.
Yeah, Jillian Walker.
Yes.
She's in BC.
Yes.
She'd be one to talk to.
Okay.
She's still around, at least.
Okay, that'd be good to know, because I have nobody in BC. Okay. Like no one in BC. Yeah. Anyway, Bessa, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, and I can tell stories forever. I got to tell you one, and then I'll stop.
Okay. So
it was at this community service, community clinic. I was a suburban, totally naive person, and all the local staff, who were most people, just set me up one day. What happened was the guys on the corner would come in at the first frost in October, and actually we would rent school buses and send them to a facility for the winter. We should do that. Anyway, one guy comes in, well known to them but not to me. Tears running down his face, and I'm on the front desk. I'm going blind. You don't know how hard it is. Oh, as I go, I can't see anymore, and I'm, fresh out of school. Oh, you poor soul, empathy all over the place. And how going blind. This was the day of the miniskirts, right? Secretary walks by with a miniskirt. Oh, what a pair of legs, he says. Of course, they're all in the back room howling with laughter. Many lessons like that.
Yes.
We had fun.
You have to laugh because if you didn't,
You
just
do.
all crying.
You do, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it's...
Well, thank you.
Well, thank
And
you.
on that